Now that we've watched the entire movie together, on with the review.
And he's not afraid of giants.
The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before listening to this review. Hello folks, welcome back to Superhero Rewind Unscripted. It's time for a really obligatory movie. It's an obligatory review about an obligatory movie, but we're going to make it as much fun and make it as interesting as possible. As always, I've taken way too many notes and a lot more than this movie probably deserves, but I'm going to get nitty and gritty with it like I always do. Tonight, I'm going to take a look at Robocop 3 from 1993, only 6 years after the original movie came out, and yet somehow it feels like a relic from the distant past that's trying desperately to look relevant again and to tug on people's nostalgia strings, even though it hadn't even been a decade since the original was released. Welcome, folks. If you're watching live, thanks a lot for being here after the fact as well. As always, feel free, if you're watching live right now, to leave comments and questions and opinions throughout the stream, and I will answer a few things here and there as I go. Of course, I'll guarantee that I'll talk about super chats, but I'll try to hit some other things as I see them as we go along. And everybody just bear with me a little bit this evening if you can. I was a little bit under the weather earlier today. I'm feeling, I think, well enough to do this, but I'm a little off. I'm a little weak tonight. So anyway, I'm gonna do my level best. But if I'm fumbling my words a little bit like I just was, that's probably why. I haven't eaten a lot today, but I'm gonna give this the old college try. If you'd like to support Superhero Rewind and the channel at large, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution, and you can become a Superhero Rewind producer at the $10 tier. That lets you join the Rewind selection board, help us pick movies for review on the program, and you can join our Discord and talk to us about superhero movies there. Once a month we meet, sometimes to watch movies, sometimes just to chat about the show and about superhero movies, and lots of other really cool things you get there. Your name read at the end of every show. And anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into Robocop 3. Let's do a real quick synopsis, shall we? Because it might have been a while since you saw this movie, and I don't usually do this, but this is a thing that I don't expect anybody to remember, because I found this to be very unmemorable, like seconds after I watched it. This was a lot like watching the original with I'm going to keep saying obligatory, but with an obvious, easy, happy ending. Oh, look, let's cap off the trilogy here, and aren't you glad that everything is a happier status quo? I think you might as well, if you want to watch a Robocop trilogy, watch the first movie, and then watch the second movie, and then just watch the first movie again. That's the best we can do right now. This is essentially that with a sort of different ending, but with the exact same beat at the very, very end. Here's our synopsis. OCP is bought out by a multinational conglomerate called Kanamitsu and is trying to relocate citizens of Detroit to finally build Delta City, which was established in the first movie, and they're still trying to make this thing happen. Robocop teams up with an underground resistance of people who have lost their homes after the leader of the relocation team, called the Rehabs, guns down his partner, Lewis. Robocop is in bad shape after that confrontation and is nearly shut down and spends most of the movie sitting or lying down and not really getting a lot accomplished. He's kind of in the background of his own movie, but the woman in charge of his maintenance, Lazarus, yeah, her name's got to be Lazarus, gee, I wonder why, joins the rebels and fixes him up, somehow eliminating his fourth directive, which has now been changed to slightly to do not oppose an OCP officer. We'll talk a little bit later about that and how it's kind of a cheat. But anyway, which stopped him from avenging Lewis's death. So Robocop helps the rebels take back their land, prevent Delta City from being built, and takes the power from OCP for good, as well as avenge his partner with the help of a silly flight suit. This movie is infamous for. Everybody makes fun of it. Oh, RoboCop 3 is bad because of the flight suit. That's an oversimplification, but the flight suit and the way it's established and the way it's used is kind of a Deus Ex Machina at the end is very goofy, and I get why everybody makes fun of it. And anyway, the rest of the police force helps out, and there's a big war on the streets in the third act, and also RoboCop fights ninja robots. In the last scene, RoboCop tells Kanemitsu's president, or I guess that is Kanemitsu, that's his name. My friends call me Murphy, you call me RoboCop. An obvious callback to the original film. There's no new exploration of RoboCop's humanity, no meaningful self-discovery, and Murphy still seems more or less in control, so we're left right back where we started at the end of the first one. The only difference is OCP is finally out of the picture because there probably won't be any more RoboCop movies. So, famously, the original script for this movie was written by Frank Miller, just like the second one. This has exactly that same story, except this one is maybe even sadder in a way, just because, A, it's really odd that Frank Miller tried this again after he was burned so hard in the second movie and his script was so compromised and it was so watered down. He comes back and gets kind of spanked again, like he was a glutton for more punishment, and he then left Hollywood, didn't write anymore, and was clearly interested in doing stuff for movies. And he doesn't come back until Sin City in 2005. He's quoted in an interview saying the screenplay is a fire hydrant, and there's a row of dogs around the block waiting for it, making the point that the director has all the power. And of course, when he finally comes back, he is directing, or at least co-directing, the couple of movies that he comes back and makes, just like with the second movie. And I also partly say it's sadder because that second movie was at least still rated R, and I'm not saying the first two RoboCop movies are good because they're R, and this one's bad because it's PG-13. That second movie is not great and is also watered down and is kind of confused and is also weirdly mean-spirited in a way that the third movie isn't, but also that Miller's script for the third movie isn't either. There's certainly a lot more edge to it, and I don't know that this. I've read both the comic adaptations now for 2 and 3, and it's been a while with 2, but I don't think that was straight up mean-spirited, although it does read like if this is supposed to be a true trilogy, as you often get with trilogies and 3-act stories in general, that second movie is the darkest one, and a lot of really kind of screwed up stuff happens in that. And the third, his third script was more or less this story, but just a whole lot better, where it's still a kind of take down the system thing. I was a little bit surprised by that when I read it, honestly, but it's handled a lot better, of course, than the film is, and it's a lot more and it's also just like this movie about the a street war and the people trying to take the power back. So in 2013, and by the way, I like this comic series better than, I want to say it was Dark Horse, the comic series for the second Frank Miller script. Partly just because I like the art better, and it's still violent, but it isn't just like wall-to-wall, in-your-face, like every page covered with blood. I can't even really tell what's happening. That was my criticism of the second comic based on a script. But anyway, so Boom Studios put out the comic series for this movie, and that was in 2013. It was 8 issues. It's a real quick read, unlike that second one. Real minimalistic dialogue, not a lot of words on the page. It's very, very action-driven. and it reads a little bit more like it's a love story. I want to say much more so than this. This isn't a love story at all, but it's almost like a Bride of Frankenstein kind of thing, with the Marie character, who in this is called Marie Lazarus. That was not in Miller's script, and she is in kind of a robotics expert like she is in this movie, although I don't think she helped build Robocop in Miller's version. I'm actually not totally sure about that, but she ends up getting like literally into his mind and is plays almost a cyborg kind of character herself, even though I don't think she ever like becomes a robot or a cyborg in that, but she's plugged into him and comes to fully understand him, and all that's really interesting, and it's very character driven in a way that this isn't. I won't spend the whole time comparing them and talking about that, but I do want to break down what Miller's original script was a little bit and what those ideas were versus what ends up happening with the movie, because it's lobotomized, it's gutted. You've heard this story 1,000 times before with decent material that's ruined on the screen, and I keep going back to this point. I haven't quite finished this, I guess, but part of the reason that this is even more awkward and maybe embarrassing and again sadder than what happened with the second one is at least the second one still has a little bit of teeth to it. At least some of the social satire and social commentary that was in the original script is pushing things forward a little bit in that second movie. This is just rehash. This is just the same thing that you've seen before all over again, with nothing new to say whatsoever, and Miller's script was not that way, which is really sad. It starts with the status quo that is closer to what we get halfway into this movie, and a lot of things that, because I watched the movie and took all my notes and got the whole review prepared before I sat down and looked at the comic, because I didn't know if I'd have time to do that, and I read it in about an hour. I maybe skimmed a little bit, but I got, more than the gist of it. And it was an interesting experience, because there were a lot of things that I kept finding myself while I was watching the movie going, why didn't they do it like this, that Miller's script absolutely did? So I was like, why don't we start with Robocop, and I'll talk about this later, in a totally different status quo than what we're used to seeing him in? Wouldn't that be a new flavor, change things up a little bit, and especially in making us wait a full 16 minutes to even see the helmet and 20 minutes to even see the actor in the costume. You'd think that the reason that we have that build-up is because he's not doing what we're used to, and he's not where you expect him to be. Maybe he is a vigilante off on his own now. After all, this is way more superhero-y than the other two movies are. Even from the beginning, it feels more like a standard formulaic plug-in for X and Y kind of superhero movie. And the everything about it is just kind of counterintuitive with the premise and some of the story beats that are with that script. If you were going to change that much about it or take out so much of the meat, why not just go with a premise that from its inception fits better with a more a less ambitious sort of project and a more formulaic thing. But anyway, so here's what Miller's story was, or some things about it anyway. So like I said, it starts with a status quo where Robocop is already with the Resistance, and immediately we clearly understand what it is he wants and what he's after, and he's made tragic, not in a generic way like with this movie where it's just everything we've had before, but now we get more details about how he feels about being Robocop, having been transformed for as long as he has. He wants revenge on OCP for Lewis's death, which would have happened before the movie even opens. And sometimes I don't like it when things like that are done off screen, but I think in this case, especially comparing it to what's done in the movie, where that feels cheap and it feels kind of gimmicky, in this particular case, I think would have maybe been the right move. It reads well in that book anyway. So he wants revenge on OCP for Lewis's death and for making him in the first place, because he feels like he was violated and was made without permission, which is a thing that he doesn't get a chance to talk about in the other two movies. And I would have certainly in this film appreciated some introspection from him. The deadline for clearing Cadillac Heights is made clearer. We'll talk about that later. It makes more sense why OCP would lose Delta City if that doesn't happen. In the movie, it's really vague. There's all this talk about, we've got 3 days to hang on to Cadillac Heights, hang on to the part of the city that OCP is trying to turn into Delta City. Why? What is that deadline about? What is the ticking time bomb? We got 3 days. Now we got 2 days. I never understood that in the movie. It makes sense in the comics without getting too into it. There's like I said, compelling story for Robocop. It reveals more than it's just spinning its wheels like with this. It does a much better job exploring how much Murphy is left in Robocop and getting to the heart, like I said, of what he really wants. This is just kind of asking the same questions that we've sort of answered already. He is a character who, even though he kind of wishes that he had died, he's been reborn now and has to live with the new state that he's in, and he deserves love. And like I said, that is a love story. The little girl in this movie, the kind of stereotypical computer genius, computer whiz girl, is in the book. She's revealed to be a robot. We get halfway through, and I guess the conglomerate that took over OCP created her, maybe, I'm not sure, to infiltrate the underground, and that was a neat reveal. And she is kind of the character, and I don't think the actress is bad, but the character in the film is kind of combined in the book, in the comic, with Marie to make one character. And then there is also this little kid, but she's not there for very long, and she turns out to be a robot. There are lots and lots of ninjas, and in the action, the way it's drawn, of course, is a lot more dynamic and cinematic and exciting than in the film. Once again, this is a movie that was really cheaply made. It didn't have a lot of a budget. I think the director is maybe doing the best he can with his resources, but he doesn't have a lot. And so even though the movie doesn't feel very ambitious, the story that it's based on is. And so we really needed to work with a different premise, because we can only get like 3 ninjas total. And of course, they're all played by the same actor, which they would be even with what we get in the comic, but there's tons of them in the book. And, of course, it's Frank Miller, and he loves ninjas. And if you thought that was a silly thing, it was like, oh, Robocop versus ninjas, and Robocop flying in a jetpack. Both of those things are in Miller's original script, and he wins me over with them, at least the way it's presented in that comic. There is more social commentary in the book about privatization, what would happen if one company owned a whole city. That, of course, is there superficially as much as it was there before, but we explore it more in the book. And the underground resistance fighters are more interesting. There's no obvious subplot with a double-crosser like you get in this movie. Several of the same scenes, interestingly, are in both versions, and some of the dialogue is lifted directly from that original script and put in the movie. But it's got a larger scope, it's more action-worthy, it's more character-driven, and all those scenes are integrated really well in that story. I guess I'm not going to have any reason to ever review this comic now, because I'm sort of just doing it here. Like I said, it really would have needed a bigger budget to put on film, and it's kind of too bad that couldn't have happened. I would have maybe even preferred that to, if I had to pick between them, to Robocop 2 getting made the way Miller intended it to, only because that movie, by comparison with this, is interesting. Like, even if it's a failure, it's a lot more interesting. It's not boring. It's it's too preposterous and over the top, and it gets really silly, and like I said, it's too mean-spirited, but I would have taken a lot of that with this over the kind of nothing movie we have. This movie is like an hour and 45 minutes long, I think, and it's shocking that it's not shorter, because even though I'm bored with it, it also feels like there's a lot missing, so it feels kind of short. You ever had that where a movie feels too short, but you're also bored watching it the whole time? It's kind of a paradox. There's still a war with the police at the end, and that whole thing is still kind of rushed, but I do appreciate that in the book, Robocop doesn't win because he flies around a while and then blows up a couple of things. Also, it's clear in the book that the civilians take the city back and start a new police department. At the end of this, it feels almost like the end of the first movie, where it's like, well, the bad guys are still in charge, but there's hope. And I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. I think the idea is the Japanese conglomerate that has taken over OCP is no longer interested in Detroit. I don't really get why they wanted it so much in the first place. That is not made clear in the movie. But by the end, I think the idea is supposed to be, because there's a lot of things that just are not communicated well with this movie, that their head bows to Robocop because Robocop has won, and he respects him, and so he's going to leave the city alone now. And all you needed was a couple of lines of dialogue. Okay, now we've got to rebuild. Bertha is a really good character in the comic version, and she doesn't die. She makes it all the way to the end. She's got this good line toward the end where she says, and I think she's a really generic character in the movie, she says, "One thing that's clear, we need to take responsibility. We can't keep putting this on others, hoping that machines and corporations will come in and fix it for us," which is like the crux of Robocop, and that's maybe a little bit too on the nose and spelled out. There's a lot of spelling stuff out in the movie that's much, much worse than that, and I just like that as the mission statement for the movie, and I wish that it had that kind of clear, direct focus. There's like I said, the ending's kind of anticlimactic. I wish there was a more clear resolution to the love story, but if this was shot the movie from that script, it would not have felt obligatory, and I would have felt something for Robocop, maybe even regardless of who was playing him. So let's get more into the movie now. This was one of the last films put out by Orion. They were in Orion. Orion is bankrupt, like Weird Al sings at the beginning of the UHF commentary. UHF was one of the things that tanked that company, or rather, they were in bad shape, and they put a lot of their eggs in that basket and thought Weird Al could save them, which I've always thought is really amusing. And there's some other films as well, of course, that they were hoping would do better than they did. Robocop 3 was made almost immediately after 2. They rushed right into production. They're even using the same script, or pardon me, the same script. That would have been better, actually. They're even using the same suit that Weller had in 2, or one of the suits that was made for that movie. And it apparently didn't fit the actor super well, Robert Burke, and he was really uncomfortable and complained the whole time that just minutes after he put the suit on, it was very difficult to play in. And poor that guy, because however you feel about his performance, and I, of course, don't think that he's great, and he doesn't step into Weller's shoes real well, apparently physically or figuratively. It sucks to be that guy during this production, because what we got is certainly not worth the pain and suffering that he went through, and maybe he should have sued. I'm just kidding. But like I said, this was a real late Orion movie. They rushed into production, and then they put it on a shelf for a year. So it was supposed to come out in 92. It doesn't come out until 1993. There were 2 video games based on this movie. One you saw footage from at the beginning, and I was kind of surprised in looking at that just how closely it followed the film. And the Super Nintendo game was what I showed you. There was also a Genesis game that had better music, but didn't have the text and cutscenes, so that's why I used that. And the video game came out way before the movie did. So if you played that, you would have gotten some of the plot points and known what some of the movie was about, I think months before the film was released, which is crazy. So have you ever let a DVD menu for a movie play for a while and then realize, like you watch a DVD menu, and we don't do this as much anymore. Now we have the opposite problem where they're way too bare bones, Blu-rays and DVDs, a lot of the time. But especially from this period when the disc I have came out, because I still have the old DVD, I haven't gotten these on Blu-ray yet, and there is, you can still see my $4.99 price tag, which is probably a couple of dollars too much for this movie, but you'd let a DVD menu play and you'd see way too much of the movie if you hadn't seen it before. So you're like, you're giving stuff away. But have you ever done that and then watched the movie and then realized you would have gotten just as much out of just watching the menu? That's what this was like. Like minute and a half of footage in the menu. That's pretty much the movie. It watches not like a toy commercial like Batman and Robin, but like an adaptation of a toy commercial. There's Jetpack. Robocop's gonna put it on. He finally puts it on at the end, and magically he wins. The end. It's like they took a commercial and went, let's make a whole movie out of it. But that, of course, is not what happened. It's just what it looks like if you haven't looked at any of Miller's script. It is, like I said, one of the most obligatory sequels I've ever seen. It's hardly worth the kind of analysis I do here, but this is the job, and like Sigourney Weaver said in Galaxy Quest, it's stupid, but I'm gonna do it. Not as ambitious as Miller's original script, and that makes the ending really lame. It doesn't have the delusions of Gander, as the guy says in this movie, that maybe 2 has a little bit, but it doesn't take any real risks, and it guts everything that was interesting out of that script. And how many times have we had this conversation? It's not offensively bad, it's just not very memorable, and it is the most blatantly superhero of these, as I said earlier. So, it's interesting because I spent the first, 15 minutes of this movie going, well, this isn't so bad. It still had a little bit of grit to it. It felt like, even though it was PG-13, some of that satire still seemed to be firmly in place. But then as it continued, I started to see the seams in it. I started to see the cheapness in some of the sets, that the actors weren't really given the material to work with to even always understand what kind of movie they were in. So a lot of melodramatic, over-the-top acting like you have in the first movie, but without a clear vision and without that kind of edge, that kind of oomph with it, and so it felt more like cartoon characters. And there was a Robocop cartoon show, of course, because a lot of these things a lot of these movies that kids weren't supposed to see had cartoon shows that were aimed at them back in the day. We don't do that so much now. I always wanted to see, like, The Matrix, the show. It probably would have been done by the same house that did Men in Black, I imagine. But if you saw that, this feels sort of like an adaptation of that show. And yet there's, like, inklings of more adult themes and a few places where it gets clever in the same way the first movie does, and I'll point that out later, but it's super few and far between, and nobody remembers that stuff. It also bashes you over the head with the same message that was there in the first movie that it didn't feel the need to keep doing. The first movie doesn't have to keep saying the phrase big business to drive the anti-corporate point home. Like, we get it just looking at it, and it gave the audience some credit. McDaggett's call sign, he is the mercenary guy in this movie that runs the group that's trying to run everybody out of Cadillac Heights. His call sign to his soldiers in the field is Big Stick. Like, really? How on the nose can you get in Lazarus? Like, we get it. I also went into this because I'd never seen this movie before. I decided not to watch 2 or 3 before I did the rewinds for them, and the big thing, I had heard how watered down and like, you know, forced family friendly this movie was, and it is and it isn't, I think. But going into it, the only thing, this is my standard, I was really kind of hoping for was that the Robocop theme would be back from the first movie, because to my recollection, none of that soundtrack is there in Robocop 2, and it is, but you got to be careful what you wish for, because I got too much of it. It plays over and over again through the movie like looped video game music. Like, I will have that stuck in my head for the next 2 months. I walked into this going, okay, all I want to hear is dun 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 dun, and now it's a loop in my brain and it's haunting me, and I want it to go away. So you've got this idea that, like, RoboCop is supposed to be tragic. So how do we push that home without changing really anything with the status quo? So we get this suggestion that OCP might erase his memories, only to do nothing with that. A lot of missed opportunities. I made a whole list of them, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. And we get these shots of him without his helmet that aren't within enough of a story or character context, where he's looking maybe dejected, maybe inhuman, like we've seen 100 times before now, and several generic flashbacks to his family, but there's no story being told with any of that. It still has the commercials that are supposed to illustrate how depraved and transparently shameless the culture is, but there aren't enough of them. There's only a couple. They're weak in comparison to even the ones in 2, and that was 2's best feature. That's what made you think, oh, we're still in the same direction, and we're going to build on things with the second movie, and then it went off the rails, and this is on safe rails, and I wish that it would go off-road. This movie is like a restaurant-made version of your grandmother's homemade cherry pie. It kind of looks and smells the same, but it's using cheaper ingredients, and your grandmother is also across the street making the same cherry pie, so you might as well just go have hers. The original RoboCop is still there. You can watch it. This gives you some things that were in that and nothing new, and doesn't do them especially well. It feels like a nostalgia bait sequel only 6 years after the first movie. Remember I'll Buy That for $1? Remember Dead or Alive, You're Coming With Me? Remember My Name is Murphy? Remember the SUX car? There's a line between using and building on mythology and continuity, and then giving us everything we've seen before with no forward progression and nothing to justify another story. It's weird that this comes out the same year as movies like Jurassic Park, because it doesn't feel especially 90s. It's still kind of stuck in 1987. It's sort of like if the original movie had come out and had been aimed more at kids and nobody would remember it. It wouldn't have influenced people or changed anything, I don't think. Again, no Peter Weller. Robert John Burke is fine, as long as he's not talking or you can't see his mouth. From behind, he's all right. His walk is a little goofy, but I mean, he's trying. I think he's cast because out of the helmet, when he's just sitting down, and this movie could have been called RoboCop Sits. He spends so much time in a chair. He looks a little bit like Peter Weller with that makeup. When he's got the helmet on, he's got these super exaggerated facial expressions that are unintentionally funny and kind of embarrassing. He's clearly not sure how to emote in that, how to convey emotion in the suit, and he often ends up coming off like a caricature of RoboCop, which makes the whole thing feel again like a cartoon. I wouldn't call the movie self-parody. I think 2 degenerates into that a little bit, but I do think this actor is playing it that way sometimes. Kind of like if you put Patrick Warburton in the helmet, and it deflates. Nothing against Patrick Warburton, but he's just doing these really goofy facial expressions. It deflates everything when you get 20 minutes in. You're like, okay, there's maybe some potential here for at least a fun popcorn thing, if not anything very thought-provoking. like the first movie, and then the first line that comes out of his mouth, you're like, oh no, I've got to live with this guy for the rest of the movie, because Peter Weller was making another film and couldn't be in this. And so he shows up and he looks all right. He gets out of his car. He's got just kind of a blank expression, and then he says, "Did somebody call for backup?" And just the way he says that, it's incredibly embarrassing. It's another real quick interesting note before I get to some ideas that I could not help but think, hey, this would make for a better movie the whole time I was watching this. It's shot in Atlanta, and was shot mostly in buildings that were marked for demolition to make space for the 1996 Olympics, which I remember distinctly happening. I was 12, and I remember people were excited that the Olympics were back in the States, and I watched. That was the only Olympics, I think, when I was a kid that I watched very closely. But I thought that was kind of an interesting note. Just wanted to mention it in case you weren't familiar with that. So I don't like to rewrite the movie. I always say that. But with a thing like this, it's hard not to make suggestions to improve on the story because there's so little here. And now we know what Miller originally intended, so that story would have been pretty good, I think. But not knowing what he was going to do, I had a couple of ideas that jumped at me that this movie, starting from a different place than Miller did, I still can't help but think, well, I wish this is what these folks had done if they didn't want to wholesale make the Miller film. So here's what I would add. Lewis, like I said, dies in a real gimmicky way, and it's real convenient. Like, she takes off her body armor, and because she's off work, and then immediately gets gunned down because of course she does. It reminds me, and it was just weird because she was the only thing I was really latching on to, because you had this new guy playing Robocop and several actors from the previous films, but they all felt like kind of glorified cameos. We weren't doing a lot with anybody. There were all these new characters I didn't care about, with the Underground and with the new bad guys. And Rip Torn is fun, but he's also really hamming it up, and the material's not there. And so I was like, well, at least we have Lewis. And then Lewis gets killed, maybe I said Murphy a minute ago. I meant Lewis. Lewis, his partner, of course, but the same actress that's been there since the beginning. She dies as kind of the first act plot point, and I'm like, again, kind of deflated. I'm like, oh, this sucks. Like, now we don't even have her. I think it would have been kind of neat, and maybe this is going to sound like a really stupid premise, but I could not help while I was watching this but think, try something, do something risky, do something that might come off really goofy, because, like, again, the Jetpack and the ninjas do in this movie, but they don't in Miller's script. So keep an open mind when I say this. What if, because I was reminded by Jessica Priest in Spawn, we kill her off, we make a big deal out of it, and then really early in the movie, and then nothing comes of that. And it was really kind of obvious that she was intended to be another Hellspawn that would come back and have to fight Al Simmons. What if we did that with Lewis in this? What if you had a Robocop who is more definitively still human, but like we established at the end of the first movie, but a cyborg now, and then Lewis goes through something very similar to what he does, and she gets turned into a Robocop, and then she has to go up against him because she's programmed by OCP to try to wipe out Cadillac Heights. He did sort of fight another Robocop last movie, but this would have been a lot more personal, and it would have also been kind of interesting to reverse roles, maybe. Like, I wouldn't want that all by itself, but if you'd not chickened out on the idea of having Robocop's emotions and memories wiped out, actually, you still would have had to do it that way, but you could have Lazarus, consider making the attempt. that whole thing is really awkward. I'm getting ahead of myself, but where you think that she's going to do it, and then you think she's done it, and then it becomes really clear that she hasn't, and then you wonder why we ever brought this up in the first place. But what if that came up and it almost happened, and then we make a bigger deal out of Robocop dodged a bullet? Like, maybe he escaped or something before that could be done to him, and then it's done to Lewis. Like, it would have been a lot more tragic with her if Robocop almost got lobotomized himself, where he becomes a full-on robot, basically. And then, instead of just losing Directive 4 when he gets damaged and then fixed by Marie, and I don't know, again, how he lost that directive. I don't know if she did it on purpose or if it was just a happy accident, but it's just a convenient plot point so that he can actually go up against the bad guys because he can't fight them if he has that directive. What if he lost all of his directives, and then we totally flip the script of what you thought was going to happen? So for a minute, you think Robocop's going to lose his emotions and possibly even his memories, and then it turns into he's as human as he ever was, or as human as he ever could be. He's lost all of his directives. There's no programming anymore. You'd need Peter Weller in the suit to pull this off real well, probably. But then you can ask the question of whether he's human again, because he's still more machine than man, even though he doesn't have the directives. He still can't physically feel very much, and he's been a cyborg for a while now. But he'd be closer to something like Darth Vader, where there's no programming, just a mechanical body. So then he goes up against Lewis, and it's reversed. So now he's the human, and she's the cyborg. And that there's no reason you couldn't still tell the same story. This is just with some meat, some character meat, something to make it personal for Robocop. You could still have the resistance stuff and the cops turning on OCP, pardon me, all of that. And then wouldn't it be interesting if Lewis was OCP's trump card when they lose their police force? So the resistance has Robocop, and then they have the secret weapon, which turns out to be Lewis. And again, I wrote all of that before I knew what Miller's plot was with the kind of Frankenstein love story, and I would have liked that as well, but my imagination ran away with itself when she died. I was like, there's so much you could potentially do with that. It also could have been horrible if under the wrong pen, so maybe it's for the best that these folks didn't do that. But anyway, Jar Jar Ed puts in her $2 super chat and says, the thumbnail looks like Robocop is constipated. Yeah, several other people said that earlier. It's a goofy shot, and it's a silly movie, and a movie that does not work real well, and I didn't want to put a very serious thumbnail up. Once again, everybody, thanks a lot for being here. I'm going to read a couple of comments real quick before I get into thematic and character stuff. John G, this movie feels like a toy commercial. Like I said, it kind of does, but I feel like it's even worse than that. I feel like it's more like it was based on a toy commercial. Ken Krantz having the iconic original Robocop movie score in it was great. Yeah, it's just overplayed, and it seems like it's relying too much on that and member berries and that kind of thing. Cinematographic, it's grandeur, you dumb, yeah, whatever she said. Ann Lewis, whatever the heck year this was, 1993, yeah. Thomas Lowe, his wooden performance really sells him playing a robot. Sure, I guess that's the silver lining, as we say over and over again in this movie. Okay, themes, this won't take long. Big business bad. Don't let business get control of an entire city. We've been here before. What makes a man? How much can he be changed before he loses what makes him human? We've been here before. How much of humanity is in people who are turned into mindless drones by rampant consumerism? Is Robocop more human than most of the regular people? Oh wait, we've been here before. And that becomes even kind of problematic by the end, where everybody sort of snaps out of, in the whole city, it seems like, the trance of being controlled by consumer interests, where people who believed everything OCP ever told them before are suddenly turning on OCP when their stocks plummet, and apparently not one person is left that trusts them anymore after I think Marie makes a stirring speech, and with no proof whatsoever as to what's happening, and everybody buys it because it's a 5-minute wrap-up. That makes that whole thing worse. A totalitarian government, in this case a company that's replaced government, can't maintain power if the people refuse to give it to them. Revolution versus submission because of fear, which is one of the big main thematic mission statements of Frank Miller's script, and it's just not executed very well here. A corporation that loses sight of its consumers as people and doesn't create a win-win for themselves and their patrons is a machine that needs to turn its customers into machines and make them part of the big machine, which goes all the way back to Metropolis from 1927. There is this kind of background idea of the exploitation of children, which I wish was in the fore and more explored. There's that commercial at the very start of the movie that says Delta City for our children, which I like, although it's kind of confusing. I'm getting ahead of myself again, but it's a little bit confusing because the first time I watched this, I thought that meant that Delta City was built already. And then it took me about 5 minutes to realize, oh no, the idea is we're trying to get it built. Okay. But yeah, so you have For Our Children, and then we have a genius kid in the Resistance who's grown up a consumer obsessed with Robocop, who is supposed to make everybody love OCP, and that backfires. She stands with her hero because he stands for her, not the corporation who built him. Again, not enough is done with that, but there's a nugget there that could have been kind of, I'm going to mix metaphors here, unwrapped and something could have been done with. McDaggett throwing money at the kids to put them in harm's way so he can lose Robocop and Robocop is chasing him. There's a little bit here and there about neglecting children and how a dystopia like this uses kids and forgets about them, and that stuff would resonate if the movie was smarter and if there was more of that stuff. But those kind of morsels of that I caught onto and would have appreciated in a better movie. It's also about how kids like jetpacks, and if you have a jetpack, you win, and also how kids are angels and never evil, and would never take over a gang and kill anyone in cold blood. Remember how that happened last movie? And then people complained about it, and then this movie was made kind of more for kids, so they went, okay, we've got to kind of free willy it a little bit, as it were. And we would never make a movie suggesting that a kid would ever take over a gang and kill people in cold blood. Of course we wouldn't. This movie seems like it wants you to forget that happened, because there's this genius little girl, and she helps Robocop. You like Penny and Inspector Gadget. We love kids. One of the big morals of the story is if you're in enough financial trouble and you have bad enough PR, no mega corporation can save you. I don't know that was an intended moral, but that was what I got from the ending. Warner Brothers should have watched this movie before the Discovery merger. Okay, the character arcs and motivations are really one note and kind of obvious, and I usually have a whole section about it. I'm going to actually skip that this time because we've already kind of touched on it, and Robocop is just in the exact same place he was before. Lazarus, her motivations are real clear, and she becomes kind of the voice for the resistance. At the end, she is a cyborg genius and kind of helped create Robocop, but she sees the humanity in him and wants people to be able to take over again. Bertha, it's real clear what she is after. The guys at OCP, same thing they've always been after, power, hanging on to it. The one interesting kind of wrinkle with that that again was in Miller's script is okay. OCP has managed to take over the city, but now they have so little resources. It's really hard to hang on to that, and so and I think he did that partly. Uh, to make the statement that that's not sustainable and it probably wouldn't work even in this kind of dystopia for very long, but also so that we would buy the take down the system thing by the end. And it's still too rushed. It still doesn't work. But at least they're not at 100%. So I guess I kind of appreciate that. Anyway, so I'm gonna go ahead and get into good stuff and bad stuff now. I like the toys and merchandise for the superhero that the little girl has. What is her name? Nico. She sounds like a camera. Because that's a thing that we do in a lot of superhero movies, and obviously she's just got toys that were made for one of the other movies or for the cartoons and stuff. But the question is always whether companies would even be allowed to make stuff based on the superhero in the movie. Like, who owns the intellectual property? With this, OCP owns it, and of course they would capitalize on it. And maybe you had that in the second movie, and I'm just forgetting. Now that I'm thinking, I think there was some merchandise stuff there, but I'm glad that we're still doing that. And it further indoctrinates children into thinking the way OCP wants them to, and to trust that they have their best interest at heart, even though they don't. Nico's father tells her daughter not to trust the TV, and then a wrecking ball comes through the wall because she's like, is it really a war zone outside? And he says, no, we're safe, it's fine. And then a wrecking ball comes in. That felt straight out of the first movie. A lot of my good stuff are just little moments or scenes that in out of context really kind of feel like they belong in that first Robocop movie. It does set a gritty enough setting at the beginning and feels more or less like the same world as Robocop, and then there's just nothing new behind it. Like, it's not as much of, at least in the look of it and the way it's directed, a straight-up cartoon as I feel like people have said it is. That's more in the way it all works out by the end and in the Robocop performance. There is this other fun bit where a guy tries to hold up a diner that turns out to be where all the cops go, and the guy behind the counter says, what is it like being a rocket scientist? I like that bit. The build-up to Robocop is initially okay. I kind of like it until I realize where we're going with it, and then it's unfortunate that there's no new status quo for him. It's kind of like the Ninja Turtles thing, but it falls flat, where we're sitting there like waiting for the turtles to show up and waiting for them to show up, and then there's shadows, and then we're still waiting, and then one of them finally jumps out. And it feels like this movie thinks it's been a lot longer since we saw the last Robocop, which is weird because it was made right after. At least the reveal for the Turtles in the second one, in Secret of the Ooze, was from the perspective of Kino, who had never seen them before, so there was a little bit of a reason for it. 16 minutes in is too long if there's not a dramatic reason for the wait, and 20 to see his face is crazy. It almost feels calculated, like the movie knows around when we're going to start to lose interest, and then it throws in the title character to wake us up again. And then a diehard fan's heart would slump when they see how this new guy carries himself. Guys, it's been about close to an hour. I need to take a quick break, so please bear with me. Sure appreciate it. And then I'll get back to good stuff and bad stuff. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in just a couple of minutes. Thanks for bearing with me, folks. I am back. Okay, so back to things I actually liked in Robocop 3. You got the scene with the splatterpunks, which are clearly based on the mutants in Dark Knight Returns, and they're not called that in his script, by the way, where you've got the sexist guy with bad tie who gets killed, and it's a little ominous, and again feels closer to the original. I like the haunting sounds of the punks when they're trying to be intimidating, and then when they show up, they're not really at all, and we keep seeing them, and they don't creep me out. They don't do anything interesting. I don't really buy that Lewis and the other cops are in danger and that they needed Robocop to show up, but that buildup is good. There's kind of a looming presence for a second. I don't think the problem is so much that the movie is not violent enough or that it's too watered down, but just that the story's not very good and it's retreading old ground. I keep doing the same thing the movie is doing. It's kind of hard not to repeat yourself while talking about this. If it told a better story, though, I don't know if people would complain that much that it was PG-13. I guess Robocop on fire and it not phasing him is a cool image, but then, of course, it phases him really hard right after that. But there's also no tension to the scene because he's chasing two splatterpunks, two bad guys that don't stand a chance. It's just there for the image. Rip Torn is good casting as the CEO, and I like that he's also like the last guy that ran things where he doesn't get a real name. I kind of like the idea that he's supposed to be almost this like faceless entity for the rest of the people of the company, where first is the old man, and now it's just generically the CEO. And I guess he's not quite old enough yet to be called the old man. It's surreal seeing him there right after shortly. It's been a few weeks since I reviewed The Man Who Fell to Earth, which was a really young Rip Torn in 1973. He is over the top in this like everybody else, just trying to make the same sort of satire the original was, and he's trying, but there's not enough there. I do like he maybe does it too often, but his faux, polite, happy, sarcastic diatribes that then just turn into relentless shouting. That's pretty funny. The guy who jumps out the window at OCP seems right out of the first movie, and they're talking about like all the suicides that they've had recently. You got the guy who goes, "That's the fourth one this month. I'd eat a bullet myself, less showy," and then he gets fired, and then he goes into the hall and commits suicide off camera. We just hear the bullet. And you get that satire of how you're owned by a company and you let them do all your thinking for you, and all the confidence comes from that. And then when they discard you, what do? You have nowhere to go. You have no identity. And I like that we do that with that character. What is his name? He's from the previous films as well. I've got him written down in some other notes, but not right here. Fleck. I like the creepy, messed up Atomo sideways face when the robots, they're called Atomo, and when you first see them, I think the idea is supposed to be you don't know that it's a robot, and I don't know if it's a cyborg like Robocop or if it's a straight up. It must be just a straight up robot. By the way, Miller's script, the idea was supposed to be that it was impossible to make another Robocop, and maybe the second movie dealt with that a little bit. This doesn't really bring that up, and so you have this company that's figured out just straight up robots as opposed to cyborgs. And when you first see him, you maybe aren't supposed to know that he's a robot. It's pretty clear pretty quickly. And then he gets hit in the face real hard. He's got this creepy sideways face that they do a couple of times. The one at the end is silly because they have it mangled enough so it looks like it sort of has horns. And I don't know why the hell they needed to go that far with it. But that's a creepy and genuinely disturbing image that maybe belongs in a Robocop movie. If you're gonna have ninjas, that's the way to do that, I think. I like there's this transformation. Pardon me. There's this transition in the editing with these three dead bodies that are on the floor, and then it transitions to a new scene in the Resistance hideout, I think, with dominoes. And The movie sometimes tries to do that kind of creative and artsy stuff, and if it did too much of that, it would seem kind of pretentious, and this wouldn't be the right material. But I appreciated what little of that was there, and could have used more of it. Like, I like the idea that the evil corporation sees people like dominoes, and they will just fall where they may, and they don't care about you. Like, that was an obvious image, not too obvious though. I mean, like, it was just clear what it was after, and I also appreciate that it's not the umpteenth chess metaphor. Oh, maybe it wasn't Fleck. Cinematographics says no, it wasn't Johnson. I think Johnson's still there through most of the movie. Johnson's the black guy that works there, that's been there since the first movie, and he got some things to do in the second movie. I'll talk about him in a little bit, because I have a missed opportunity with him. The scene is sappy. We'll talk about this later in bad stuff, but I do kind of like Nico's "I'm glad your new heart works" after Robocop tries to, this is the little girl, tries to comfort her about the death of her parents. He's proving that he has a heart. We've got a kind of Iron Man heart motif there. The guy who asked Sergeant Reed in the police department if he's like, oh, you got a Robocop. Do you have an alien cop? A ghost cop? A vampire cop? That was kind of a fun bit. Robocop driving a pink pimp mobile is sort of funny. They should have put out a toy for that for kids. I like the bit where Robocop, he had some really lame one-liners in this movie, and I wish he said stuff more often like this. He fights that ninja robot, and he says, you are under arrest for assaulting an officer, and then the ninja slices some of his robot fingers off, and he says, and destruction of police property. And I liked that. I wanted more moments like that. And then finally, I like the reveal that there are multiple ninja robots, because you're not really expecting that, but then you gotta wonder, besides budgetary reasons in the movie, why, if they've got 3, they didn't bring over like 20 or 50. Okay, I'm gonna get into not so good stuff, but I'm gonna start with missed opportunities, because I wrote several of these down and I decided, there should just be a section for this. So here are some things that, again, just got my imagination running with me, like, why aren't we doing more with this? And if I had read Miller's script first, I might not have thought of as much of these, because a lot of this is stuff that you could just replace his script for this movie and you wouldn't need this stuff. But forgetting that and just looking at the movie as we have it, there's a lot of, why didn't you run with this thing that you've got here? You're wondering where Robocop is at the beginning, and if maybe he's not even a cop in the city anymore, but then it, as I said earlier, is just business as usual, and the Miller script does not have that problem. It just should start with some kind of a different status quo. There's this bit where Nico at the beginning, this is really the only Ed 209 moment that we have. She hacks in because she's a computer genius, and she makes Ed 209 loyal as a puppy, and that's the literal command she gives it when she hacks in. I was shocked that a scene like that is actually in the comic version of Miller's script. Loyal as a puppy. It's not that little girl, but it's still like a man, and the Ed 209 in that actually sticks around. I think Marie uses it. And I wondered about that in this movie. I was like, okay, you've completely reprogrammed an Ed 209. Why wouldn't you take it with you? As silly as it might be if it turned into the little girl's pet, like she's in a Hanna-Barbera cartoon or something, like, you wouldn't want it to go that far, but wouldn't the Underground use it? And again, I would have been fine with the movie getting that silly and going off the rails compared to the boring kind of thing that we have. The resistance fighters and most of the cops are good guys, but they find themselves at odds with each other. Sometimes we're watching chases or fights between two factions that we would separately be rooting for. It might be interesting if some of the cops had to deal with loyalty to the people over loyalty to the corporation that owns them before they all follow Sergeant Reed in the third act and quit. And I think also Sergeant Reed should be more conflicted before that happens also. And that also doesn't happen in Miller's script, which I was kind of bummed out by. Robocop, it's not a perfect script. Robocop records a crucifix outside a church when he first spots Nico, and I thought there might be a religious subplot or theme there, and that never happens. It could be interesting, again, keeping in mind that this is based on Miller stuff, and I thought that kind of thing might be a Miller script, and it's really not. But it might have been interesting. So some of this is, here are places Miller maybe should have gone also. It could have been interesting to explore what's happened to Christianity in this dystopian world, and to find out if Murphy was religious at all. And I don't think there's anything in the first two movies that tell us that, but it's been a while. I might be forgetting something. If God is real, does Robocop still have a soul, or did Murphy already go to heaven? These are questions you could ask within a religious context if you had like a priest character or a really devout character. Sort of a what if Matt Murdock was Robocop kind of angle. And I wouldn't mind some retroactive characterization as long as it didn't seem too retconny. Then you've got the whole thing with the microneuro barrier, where we're supposed to get rid of Robocop's emotions and his memory, and that feels like a first act plot point. It's set up like we're gonna explore it, and then we drop it very quickly. It might have been too much retread from the last movie. I was actually a little bit worried when it looked like we were going to go there, and then I was like, well, why bring it up at all if we're not going to deal with it? It might have been too much retread from the last movie with the reprogramming, with the extra directives, but it also could lead to something new and intriguing. The barrier device could have even been a MacGuffin. What if the rebels got their hands on it and wanted to control Robocop to fight OCP? Of course, he goes with them willingly, but what if he was reprogrammed or didn't go with them right away, and there was this thing that somebody could use to get control of him? And then you might have an ethical conundrum for the rebels there that could have made them more interesting, because they're all real one-note and not especially compelling to me. So you have this ethical conundrum of having to become the evil to fight the evil. Though I still think a fully human Robocop would have been the more interesting thing to explore. So somebody mentioned Johnson earlier. He's been here for 3 movies, played by the same actor. It might have been cool to let him take over the company and see if he has his own ambitions and own ideas. Maybe, because he's such a yes man. What if he got control and didn't have to be a yes man anymore? What if we had that moment where he went, oh, I can make up the rules? What would he do? What kinds of rules would he make up? Would he still want to build Delta City, or would he have a different idea, maybe a better idea? He strikes me as a Baxter Stockman type, and it might have been really interesting to see him take over. Robocop actually on the rehab team, like the sexist OCP guy wants him to be, would have been an interesting thing to deal with too. And then, of course, if we'd had the budget, it would have been nice if we had gotten the Frank Miller thing where Robocop actually fights an army of ninjas as opposed to just 3 of them. Oh, we got 2 at once. Ooh. Okay. More bad things. So you've got and some of these will be a little bit nitpicky. Again, fine-tooth comb, stuff I noticed as I went along. I might skip a few here and there. There's the pointless news broadcast at the beginning. I say it's pointless. I mean, I appreciated the for the children bit of it, but I'm sorry. The news broadcast as opposed to the commercial. No, the commercial is okay, just the placement of it is weird. The news broadcast is actually kind of pointless, because it's there just to give us a bunch of exposition, and everything we need to know that's in that, we're going to get in a couple of scenes with characters in a more natural way anyway right after that. Robert Burke's casting and performance is not great. We talked about that. It's also weird, a few decades later that he, 2.5, 3 decades later, he looks a little bit like Ryan Reynolds in the face. Hey, there's a lot of bad dialogue in this movie. Here's some examples. The rehab officer to Bertha toward the beginning, when they're relocating people, he's, I said, get up, you drunken cow. Nothing about her makes her look like she's been drinking. I don't understand that. You have cliche writing, like when Robocop is waxing sappy when the movie is trying to build a rapport between him and Nico. And again, I liked her side of that, but it starts with Robocop saying, "Do you miss your parents? If you remember them, they're never really gone." Just Robocop sounds like he's in a Disney movie. It's fine to have that sentiment, but that word for word you've heard 100 times in family films. McDaggett, toward the end, who I just want to call like John Daggett, John McDaggett. He says, "No flashy bravery, Tin Man, or the two cuties die." Ugh, somebody wrote that on a piece of paper and then made somebody say it. If you're just figuring out the line between big business and war is a little blurry, then this is the same character, then you are further over the hill than they say you are. Wow. On the nose much? Bertha gives a speech through a megaphone in the opening scene and yells, "There is no silver lining." And then the silver lining thing comes back again toward the end with Lazarus on the news, and you're wondering what they're quoting. Like, it seems like maybe there was a version of the script that had a commercial or some kind of propaganda piece, maybe McDaggett talking on on TV or something, saying, we know this sucks, but there's a silver lining. Like, everything will be better when Delta City is built. Just trust us. Nobody ever says that before they do, and you wonder why they keep saying silver lining. Like, toward the end, she's got that big string speech, Lazarus, Marie, and she goes, "The only silver lining is the silver they're lining with their pockets." And it's like, why do we keep saying that? It never showed up anywhere. None of the resistance fighters are especially well-developed or really memorable. Coons is the most animated, played by Stephen Root, who I've seen in a few things, but he's too over the top, and it's really no surprise when it turns out that he's working for the bad guys. He also does this weird character quirk thing where he's constantly sticking his tongue out, and it's very distracting, and I think it's a poor choice. And Bertha, to me, and again, this is maybe not fair because I'm basing this on a performances I saw years later. She seems like kind of a low-rent Alfre Woodard to me, and when she dies, I don't care as much as I should. Bad setup and payoff. Bertha insists on stealing Robocop's jetpack because it looks expensive when they break into the police armory. She doesn't know what it is, and they're trying to get out fast before the cops get there. It's like they've read the script, they know exactly how much time they have, and they've got this really heavy thing they're gonna have to carry. They don't even know what it's for. And then we wait all movie to find out what it is, and the payoff is pretty lame and pretty silly. It's set at Christmas time, but nothing is done with that period at all, and you don't feel like you do with a lot of Batman stuff that's set at Christmas time, where it kind of creates a new atmosphere for the whole thing. Lewis's reveal at the beginning from behind a newspaper is kind of fan servicey. Again, like, it's been 20 years since we last saw these characters. Robocop from the beginning of the movie seems like a total liability, and I don't know why OCP hasn't pulled the plug on him already. He can't be controlled at all, regardless of his directives, so even if the public loves him, it does not seem to behoove them to keep him around. And the movie is constantly lacking in communication to the audience. There's an officer that says, "Did you hear what they did to Murphy?" And then Robocop shows up, and he's non-responsive to Lewis. And so you think that he's been lobotomized, like the OCP guy ordered Lazarus to do. And it's cheap suspense, because in the very next scene, Lazarus is about to destroy the device, hilariously with like a mallet. She's just holding the hammer, and she's about to smash it. It's kind of pointless. Lewis taking off her body armor ever in that city is dumb and a really bad idea. And I don't want to say she deserves to die, but like, I don't care if you are off duty or not. Like, you're a cop in this city, you'd want to be protected all the time. Robocop's fourth directive has now been reworded to never oppose an OCP officer, like we talked about earlier, which ends up translating in the movie to you could do anything in opposition to an OCP officer as long as you don't kill them. Like, I would think that never oppose an officer would mean you have to take orders from them and you can't go up against them, and certainly you wouldn't be allowed to shoot bullets at their feet. Robocop spends the whole movie getting wrecked. He doesn't do anything cool until he finally puts on a jetpack, and it's very lame. Robocop promises Lewis he'll get them for her, but he doesn't use his own ingenuity or cleverness to accomplish that goal. Lazarus just eliminates the fourth directive. Somehow, don't know how she does that, and now he's able to oppose OCP officers. The reason he couldn't avenge her right away was because of that directive. It's taken away with no explanation. Now he can put on a jetpack and fight him. Yay. Lewis dying in a church feels somehow heavy-handed. We don't do anything with it thematically, but somehow it seems kind of ham-fisted. There is no great chemistry with the kid and Robocop. She's not a bad actress. There's just not enough screen time between them. I have lots of bad stuff, so bear with me. This will probably take another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll get to some questions. There's a tired framing the hero plot, which is kind of irritating, and I don't understand why so many people just outright believe Robocop is not capable of any of the atrocities OCP is saying that he's doing. It's nice that you've got characters that aren't supposed to be stupid, that don't believe everything they hear on the TV, but at the same time, we know that Robocop can be reprogrammed and that things can go wrong with his machinery and go haywire and stuff. So you'd think that people would not immediately know who to believe. Robocop sits down too much. I mentioned that he sure causes a lot of unnecessary property damage. He goes into a I think, apartment complex, and he gets on an elevator. And the guy that owns the place says, the elevator sticks. So he goes up and then he just, breaks the door down. And it's totally not necessary. And that's going to make things very difficult for everybody that lives there. But whatever. He doesn't care. McDaggett falls out a window when Robocop shows up to kill him. And this is maybe the most absurd moment of the movie. He backflips. And it doesn't feel like he backflips on purpose like he's a Power Ranger. But he falls out of the window and he does a backflip, and then he just lands on the street flat-footed and conveniently has no ill effects whatsoever and survives, and he's fine. It's insanely unbelievable. Even for this material, that's crazy. Nico should be more at the center of the story. There's this bit where the adults that are caring for her, some of them die, some of them get taken away, and she yells, "It's happening again!" She's got PTSD from her parents getting killed, and I want to be with her in that moment and feel bad, but I don't feel like we spent enough time with her and her grief, and I like that she's not whining through the whole movie, but she's just not present enough. OCP's stock hilariously drops to 0 minutes after Lazarus's overwritten broadcast telling people that OCP is the enemy. And I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to bring it up again. Wouldn't people be so indoctrinated that some of them would still trust OCP until they saw what was happening for themselves? And wouldn't it take longer before the whole company was ruined? Even now, it's 5 minutes later, our stocks have plummeted. You have to wait for a stock report. I don't know. Especially before the internet, which this is supposed to be set in the future, but they don't have the internet. By the way, the first movie, I talked about this in my rewind, I never could tell, and I liked this about it, I liked the ambiguity of this, whether it was supposed to be a futuristic dystopia or a present-day dystopia that was somewhat futuristic. And there's a difference there. We're never told how many years in the future it is. And this feels, and I don't remember how I felt with the second movie, but this movie feels much more clearly we're in the future. There's a really typical villain death where McDaggett has a bomb that's counting down from 5, and then the building explodes and he accidentally is responsible for his own death, and finally Robocop becomes his own Deus Ex Machina at the end. let me see what folks are saying in the comments here. Cinematographic, I think the silver lining thing is meant to be the tagline for Delta City. Do we ever see it on a sign, or is it in any commercials? There's only a couple that I missed. I do, and even if we see it later in the movie, it's weird that Bertha toward the beginning of "there is no silver lining," and then we don't know why she says that really, and we haven't seen anything with that yet. It looks like reverse setup payoff to me. Oh, Chaz Blankenship says Delta City, the future has a silver lining as a callback to the first film where that slogan is on a billboard. Okay, it's been a while. I forgot about that. Never mind, I'll give that a pass. That's okay. I mean, it would have been nice if we had it again somewhere, especially because the movie is pretending like it's been 20 years since I've seen the last movie, and then it wants me to remember things like that. But yeah, I wish I'd had the time to sit down and watch this as a trilogy for this review, and I just didn't. James Curry, wait, it said at Christmas. I only just now know that. Yeah, we see Christmas decorations at stores, and there's some Christmas music, and it's subtler than it should be, probably. Jareth Gearhart, I watched it last night. Not sure what to think of it. It seems to cheat at some storytelling stuff. Yes, it does. Daniverse, Lewis only died because Nancy Allen had enough. That's sad if that's true. Daniverse sad about how this killed Fred Dekker's career. That's the director. We've not really talked about him. Movie's not good, but I think he should have been given more chances. He directed 4 movies total, including Night of the Creeps from 1986, which I know nothing about, Monster Squad in 87, which I have seen, I think I've seen that movie, Robocop 3, and The Predator he wrote, but didn't direct, and he's been pretty much, oh, interesting. I didn't know this. Okay, he's been pretty much out of the business, but occasionally has popped back in to do a couple of things, and he wrote 3 episodes of Enterprise. Crazy. Okay, you guys are going to have to indulge me for a minute because I need to figure out which episodes they were, because, of course, I'm a big Star Trek guy, and I want to see if they're good ones or not so good ones. But now that we're talking about this, I can see his name in the credits at the front of episodes. I wonder what they were. Let's find out. Fred Dekker, Enterprise. This won't mean anything to a lot of you guys. Oh, interesting. Okay, he co-wrote During an Incident with Berman and Braga, which is one of the best episodes of the first season. Sleeping Dogs in the first season, which is fine, and Vox Sola. So he only did, and I don't remember anything about that episode, he only did first season stuff, apparently. But it's so weird that they got him, and I wonder why that was. Okay. Anyway, moving right along. Okay, I have questions, as always, and I'm going to run through them very quickly. Why is the little girl at the beginning, Nico, why does she like watching the news so much? She's like, don't interrupt me, I'm watching Media Break. Like, I get that she's a computer genius, but she doesn't seem super grown up, and like she's trying to learn all she can about what's wrong with the world. She seems indoctrinated, but then she won't be. I mean, maybe the idea is supposed to be that she pretty much is, and then her parents die, and then now she's disenfranchised or disillusioned, and she's starting to realize what the world really is, but we don't spend enough time with her to really get that sense from it. Pardon me. Why exactly does Kanemitsu have the same agenda the old man had? Like, why does he think Delta City is still a good idea? I wish we'd get into that. Why doesn't the police armory have security inside the building? I'm doing this chronologically. In case someone manages to disable or destroy the Ed 209 that it has outside. Like, you'd think it would have more security. What makes Bertha think it's Robocop in the police car following them toward the beginning? She's like, oh, I don't think it's human. Like, he's got tinted windows, and he's not doing anything weird with his car. Like, he's slightly straddling the center line, but that's it. How do you know that? This is a big one for me. Murphy goes against orders to answer Lewis's call for backup at the beginning. Doesn't this happen all the time. We're told there are 3 cars coming to her aid. As far as Robocop knows, she's gonna be fine, and as far as and like, she doesn't really need him. There's cars coming. Wouldn't this be a constant problem? Like, he seems way too overprotective of her. And going along with that, why does Robocop destroy the computer on his dash in his police car instead of just ignoring the sergeant? It's for dramatic effect, obviously, but I think he'd go through a lot of that. And it's also funny in the same movie where he has a joke about breaking police property. He's constantly doing that himself. What makes Robocop choose to record things? Like, is it just when something reminds him of a memory that he has? He seems to just do it when the plot needs him to. And maybe the other movies kind of had this problem too, but you've got Nico outside the church, and then later we're going to see a memory, this is all very generic, from his past that reminded him of her, and apparently that's why he was recording. But I don't always know what makes him choose to do that. Is it supposed to be revealed that Atomo is a robot, or are we supposed to know that from the first time we see him? I kind of asked that already. The sergeant is Sergeant Reed, and we've had him since the beginning, is a reasonable man, but he says the homeless people fighting for their homes are terrorists. So this is toward the beginning, does he believe that, or is he just saying what OCP wants him to say, and then by the end he's had enough? I can't totally tell what his convictions are until he draws the line at taking people out of their homes. So Robocop does not get the robot lobotomy, and we're supposed to think for a minute maybe he has. So Robocop asks Lewis if she has a family, and she thinks that's weird because she's like, well, you already know that? And I don't actually know why he asked that, except to get the audience off the trail for 6 seconds. When Robocop joins the rebels, why does Bertha say, set an extra place on the radio? He's a cyborg. He doesn't eat food. How does Fleck know whether Lazarus wiped Robocop's emotions or not? McDaggett lies and says Robocop killed Lewis, and based on that, Fleck calls Lazarus and accuses her of disobeying orders. He's like, you gotta come to this meeting with me tomorrow, and maybe you won't be brought up on charges. If Robocop had killed Lewis, though, it would have suggested Lazarus did something to Robocop, not that she didn't do anything, because the last unpredictable thing he did was to disobey orders and try to save his partner. This whole thing makes no sense. The CEO says they need to eliminate Robocop so the squatters are more easily persuaded. That's in Frank Miller's script and makes more sense there. Robocop was badly damaged, and McDaggett knows that. So why are they worried about Robocop until he makes a move? Is it smart for Lazarus to take an OCP van to the rebels' hideout? Like, you'd think, because the kid goes to her and says, hey, I know Robocop, and then they go to the secret headquarters of the Underground, and they bring this big OCP van, and you'd think they probably have trackers. Oh, that's a good question, Cinematographic. And why are we just now hearing about Kanemitsu? Yeah, good question. James Curry, why is the movie set 20 years later? I couldn't really tell when I watched it the first time. It's not. It certainly doesn't watch like it is, and everybody's kind of the same age they were last time we saw them. So I'm not sure where you're getting that from. But let me know. Is it smart for Lazarus to take an OCP? Oh, I already said that. Pardon me. How does Robocop's efficiency, and Frank Miller plays around with those numbers too. In the movie, his efficiency goes from 23% to 12% in the time it takes Lazarus to deliver 2 lines of dialogue. So he should have been totally shut down by the time she got there. It was very quick. He's about to go sleep. How does Lazarus eliminate the 4th directive exactly? We've talked about that. What is the point? And it seems like it's just for the sake of a special effect. Like, it looks cool, and I want it to mean something, but it doesn't seem to mean anything. What is the point of the vision Robocop has of the 3 most important women from his life all morphing into each other? Like, it doesn't inform the character in any way. There's no romance plot in this. It's just, here's my wife. Here's Lewis hears Lazarus, and they morph into each other. And, like, these are women that have been important in my life. Okay? Bertha has a countdown for how long they have to keep their territory before OCP can't take it. We talked about this earlier. I don't, in the movie anyway, really get the significance of that date. In the book, it's, and maybe it's mentioned in the movie and I missed it, in the book, it's, they're going to run out of money by that point, OCP, which is still kind of weird, because it's like, well, if we're going to run out of money, and then we have access to this, and we can magically start building a city, like, how do you have enough money to do that? I don't fully understand the details of all of that. What is the point of making a jetpack for Robocop? I mean, I realize that the funding got cut, so they never put it into practice. It's weird though that they built it. Like, there's this prototype and they have it, but they never give it to Robocop. It's like, well, it clearly fully functions. The funding ran out. Why don't you just give it to him? I don't understand. Like, he still works for the police department. Why not just give it to him? It's weird. Why would you need to fly in Detroit if you're a police officer? I mean, I guess with the internal logic of the movie, you automatically win if you have a jetpack. So that would be why. But it makes sense if he's a soldier going on overseas missions where he would be used sort of like a drone. Like, we don't laugh at Iron Man because he flies, but it's silly here. I think it's just because he's a police officer and because it's such an easy, plot device at the end. But it's also silly because it's a separate pack. Like, you'd think, because if Miller built it into his suit, it was an upgrade. And in this, it's just he's got this jetpack and he puts it on himself. Why can't other officers wear jetpacks? And again, it didn't get put into production, so maybe the idea was supposed to be there were going to be a bunch of them, but it's not talked about like that. It's like, it's just Robocop's flight pack. James Curry, must have misheard something then. Yeah, sorry, when I said 20 years earlier, what I meant was, it seems like the movie's attitude is, look how long it's been since we had a Robocop film. It feels almost like, in the way it's written, in the way it's directed, like a decades later sequel, even though it's only been a couple of years since the last Robocop movie, and it's only been 6 years since the first one. So that's just kind of the attitude it has. It's weird how much it has in common with movies today where we kind of soft reboot things. It kind of feels like one of those, even though it's the third in a trilogy. The rehabs have a box of explosives at the police station just sitting out where anybody can get to it. That's weird. Kanemitsu sends McDaggett a weapon of mass destruction. And I don't know why he does that if he doesn't want McDaggett to use it. He's like, I need to know about your methods. I'm like, well, maybe if you don't know his methods, you shouldn't send him this thing that can disintegrate people within a couple of block radius. Seems like a bad idea. Why didn't McDaggett make the police go to Cadillac Heights in the first place? It seems like when he finally makes that call, it's because he just got attacked by Robocop, but he was already worried earlier, like I said, that they had Robocop, so why not make the cops go, with the rehab people? I don't know. I already talked about some of that stuff. Robocop just drops his jetpack as soon as he walks into the room with McDaggett. Like, that seems like a bad idea. Like, somebody could blow it up. Somebody could steal it. I mean, I guess it's heavy, but why would you just drop it? Why not keep it on? Is it heavy for you? You're a robot guy. Why does Robocop call McDaggett chum? Maybe I need a third viewing, because the word chum comes up earlier, and I forget who says it, but I'm pretty sure Robocop's not in the room. So it reads sarcastic, like he's making fun of somebody that said it earlier, but I don't think he could. So I don't know, I could be wrong about that. Griffin Millet, $4.99 super chat. Would you imagine Neil Blomkamp's planned sequel would follow the trilogy? I haven't thought about this in a long time. I forgot about this. Or ignore it and only follow the original, like Halloween 2018. I don't know. I think you could easily go either direction. Like, even after 3, I don't think anything is wholly unsalvageable, because 3 doesn't get anything new done with the character anyway. It just says, OCP has been, shut down now. That's fine. You can still do dystopian stories after that, or it might be interesting to do a story where it's not as dystopian, but there is a fear of that creeping back in. So, yeah, I don't know what he would have done, but I could totally see doing it really either direction. cinematographic, he was throwing McDaggett's words back. Oh, it was McDaggett saying it. Okay, but I didn't think he was in the room when McDaggett said the word chum. Maybe he was, and I'm forgetting it now. Okay, so I need to bring up tweet-length reviews because and pardon me guys, I totally forgot to write those in my notes, so give me just a couple of seconds here, but if you would like to leave a tweet-length review yourself, just write a short review, what you think of this movie, and as a $5 super chat, and I will read the ones that we got from Patreon. Things are running kind of slow here. My apologies. Okay, didn't get any there. I think I've only got a couple for this one. And I have a couple of different places that I collect these at. So my apologies. Okay, we've got 3 on Patreon, one from David Crabtree. He says, a perfect example of watered-down diminishing returns. Robocop 3 watches like a bad made-for-TV movie pilot, devoid of any of the original film's personality, wit, or flavor, and even squeezes in a blatant action figure accessory commercial at the end. Peter Weller's absence is felt immediately and throughout, but even he couldn't have salvaged this thing. 0 out of 4. That is harsh. Michael Gulick. It's a bad movie, but can be some fun if you're with friends and in the right mood for schlock. The real problem is, it is a Robocop movie. In context, with the original, this is like a kid wearing his dad's business suit, an ill-fitting attempt at stature by connotation. I like that a lot. It loosely conceals its own immaturity, ultimately proving itself to be a little ridiculous and largely pointless. 0.5. And Thomas Edghill says, horrible movie that makes me embarrassed that I have the Robocop skin in Fortnite. 0.5 out of 4. Okay, so let me make sure that I didn't get any in the Rewind producer Discord real quick, and then I will give you my rating. We'll rank the movie, and then I will reveal what I'm doing next week. And if you've been watching the Captain Logan show, you will already know that because I have announced it there, but no place else. Dayghost Austin dropped a Robocop tweet-length review and said, Robocop, one of the best films ever made. It's too bad they didn't make more. It had a lot of franchise potential. 0.5 out of 4. And Subject says, the worst Robocop sequel that does not remotely capture anything I like about the first 2, sanitized to an extreme and missing Peter Weller. But at least it's not the remake. I kind of agree with that. I would maybe rather watch this over the remake. 1 out of 4. Somehow it feels even almost more creative than that. Which is a crazy person thing to say. Okay, my rating, pardon me. It's late. I've not been feeling well all day. My rating is a 1.5 out of 4. I couldn't go quite to a 1 because enough of what I like, especially now that I've read it, and Miller's script is intact, I feel like it was worthy of a little bit of a better score, and the directing is not as bad as I expected it to be. But, yeah, it's entirely superfluous. And we should stop talking about it. I have heard an urban legend, I forget where I got this, that the number of roars the lion at the beginning of an MGM movie gives suggests the quality of the movie, and that is fascinating to me, because it's not always the same. Like, sometimes it roars once, sometimes it roars a couple times. I think sometimes it doesn't even roar at all, and it roared twice with this movie, and this is not a 2-roar movie, so that seems to just completely discount that whole theory. Anyway, 1.5 out of 4. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I'm doing next time, but first let me briefly say thank you to our patrons at all of the tiers, of course, but especially our Patreon producers and folks at the $15 tier as well. You guys are wonderful. Sure appreciate you. And that includes Blake, Chewbacca's Lover, David Crabtree, Elliot Slater, Gooster123, Hot Soup, Joe Turner, Joe Gira, Joshua Gilisano, Matt Bat 68, Michael Martin, Stone Gassman, Super Billy the Day Ghost, Thomas Edgehill, Ad March, Checkers the Inventor, Damon Begay, Jacob Schneider, Kareem Roberts, Matthew Brody, Michael Gulick, Miguel Rodriguez, Nathan Jones, Thorne Jones, and Wendell Jones. No relation, I am sure. And finally, Zach. Once again, if you want to become a Patreon producer, a Superhero Rewind producer, and get on the selection board, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution. That's the $10 tier. We have cool perks at the $2 tier and the $5 tier as well, and at the $15 tier you can make requests for the request. Eventually I'll be bringing back the request tier for Rewind. I've got a few more requests left to do. I've knocked some of them out, but I still got to get the rest of those done. And finally, let me I forgot to rank the film. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. We're still on Robocop 3. Okay, so at a 1.5, let me show this to you guys. At a 1.5, if it was the very bottom, it would be in the 134 spot. So let's just bump it up. Each movie, I think right away it's a little bit better than. So Captain America 1990, yeah, I'd put it above that. The Superman musical from 75, maybe slightly, although it's kind of right around. The Throne of Atlantis, I really dislike. I'd almost rather watch this over that. The Super Mario Brothers movie, Spawn, I compared it to. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I don't think I would put it above the original Buffy movie. So I think it's going to sit between, well, what about Spawn? It's hard to say. That's a toss-up. Yeah, I think I'm going to put it between the Mario movie and Spawn. Again, this could always change, but that's where I'm going to put it right now. Next time, I'm going to be talking about the insanity you see behind you. I've gotten a lot of requests lately since I have revamped my superhero movie collection display and put the entire thing in the backdrop. A lot of people have been suggesting that I finally do a follow-up collection video. I haven't done one in a long time. And just go through the whole collection and show you guys what I own, some of the different releases of things, and talk a little bit about the way I collect now, maybe versus how I used to, and why I buy what I buy. The way I buy it, I've overhauled this even since last you saw it. I've taken a lot of duplicate things down and box sets for TV shows that I know I'm going to buy the entire the entire series when it's released, if it's not already, and I'm going to be selling those pretty soon. So I have moved some stuff around, and I've got a little bit more space back there than I did before, but it's still pretty full, and I've been kind of going gung-ho recently since I did this. I've gotten the bug again, and I've bought a few really cool box sets that I'm excited to show you, both for movies and TV shows. So we'll do that. I'm planning on doing it in one video, but if we go a couple hours and I'm only like halfway through, I'll go ahead and slate that like a part 2 for the very next week. So I'm just going to play things by ear and kind of do it like I did the ranking video a couple years ago when I first started that whole thing. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching live. And thanks for watching after the fact as well. Let me read this last super chat real quick. Jar Jar Ed, $5 super chat. It was confirmed by Neil Blomkamp that he would have ignored the Robocop sequels. I didn't know that. Okay. I mean, that certainly makes sense, but like I said, I could see doing it either way. Okay, so I'm excited about next week. It's going to be a lot of fun, and then we'll get back to the reviews after that, and I'll put out a poll for the selection board in a week and let folks help me decide what I'm doing next. I don't know what the category is going to be yet, or if I'm going to pick 4 random movies, or how I'm going to handle it, but in the meantime, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening and a wonderful week. I'll be back again tomorrow night on Geekvolution for the Captain Logan show at 7 o'clock Central, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye, folks.